Thank you very much, Mr Swinney. The Cabinet Secretary for Education is now going to take some questions. You will all have been aware that an email was sent out asking for these questions. I have some in front of me, so I'm just going to read out the name of the delegate, and if that delegate could ask their question directly to the Deputy First Minister. So, up first is James Cowan, Renfrew. Where are you, James? Renfrew.
Thank you. First Minister, Deputy First Minister, sorry. In September last year, the government's highly respected group of international advisors gave advice on recruitment and retention at their conference to retain teaching staff. Part of this advice was to reduce contact time, and other was to increase salaries to at least 40,000. How does the Education Minister plan to take this advice of his international advisors forward?
Thanks for the question. I think some of the approach that I intend to take, I set out in my speech, but let me come back to some of it. In relation to contact time, I think one of the crucial points for me is about how we ensure that the contact time that the teaching profession has is as effectively used as it possibly can be. And some of that comes back to my point in my speech about making a judgment about whether all that you are doing is relevant to the learner's journey. And that's the test that I apply on all of these questions about bureaucracy and workload and the steps that we take. Is it actually enhancing the learner journey? Because in that respect, we have to make sure that we have an intensely focused approach to valuing that contact time. Now, we have in the, to move on to your second point, in the pay agreement for 2017-18, agreed to examine a number of these issues as part of the implementation of the 17-18 pay agreement. And I remain committed to doing that. And of course, the 18-19 negotiations are underway in relation to the second point of your question about the salary levels of the teaching profession. And obviously, we are very committed to doing that by negotiation. We will do as much as we possibly can do. I think we're helped by the fact that the Scottish Government has lifted the pay cap, and that's the first time that an administration in the United Kingdom has lifted the pay cap that has existed for some years. And I accept that pay constraint has been a real issue within the public sector. It's been an acute issue within the teaching profession. And I'm committed to address that as much as I can through the SNCT negotiating machinery, and to do that alongside the professional associations and our local authority partners. And I suppose the final point I'd make is this, that the issues that you raise and which the International Council raise are important issues, but there's also other issues I think that are important in relation to the strength of learning and teaching, and that's about professional development and professional enhancement. And I hope you and your colleagues took some encouragement from what I said in my speech about the development of new routes for career pathways within Scottish education, because I think we have limited those routes to too significant a degree, and we need to open up new career pathways so that teachers can be properly rewarded for enhancing their professional practice by routes other than pursuing administrative leadership within the profession. And I'm very committed to making sure that we advance on that agenda in the period to come.
Thank you. Second, Monique Drion-Gould, Lothian area.
Deputy First Minister, where are the promised home-to-school link workers that every school was supposed to have access to back in 2017? And why are we still reducing the numbers of classroom assistants that provide valuable enhanced support in our classrooms?
Okay, On the question of when we set out our agenda on the developments within Scottish education, one of the points that we suggested, you're quite correct, was about the establishment of home-to-school link workers as part of our reform agenda. Now, you'll be aware that we haven't completed the reform agenda. We're partway through that. Quite a number of schools around the country have invested in home-to-school link workers through the utilisation of pupil equity funding or Scottish Attainment Challenge resources, and also a number of local authorities fund personnel of that type. So we have a kind of range of provision around the country which will vary from area to area dependent on the choices made within individual schools. And I think when I look at some of the practice that's been undertaken through pupil equity funding, I see the value. I think we're actually beginning to see the value, and I hear this from schools of the work, of the activities of homeschool link workers, particularly in relation to improving attendance and participation in school. And you know, it's a pretty basic point that if a young person isn't in the school, they're unlikely to be benefiting from education to enhance, to close the poverty-related attainment gap. So I think that the argument for is well made, and I think we see a range of different provision available around the country. On the question of classroom assistance, obviously many of the decisions about the deployment of resources within individual schools are taken at local authority level within their budget arrangements. And what we have tried to do, and what is encouraging to see, is to make available to local authorities the resources that enable them to invest in education. And what we've seen in the last financial year was further growth in the investment in education being undertaken by local authorities. And that obviously has the potential to result in an increase in classroom assistance. But I recognise the important role that classroom assistants can provide within individual classrooms in supporting the learning of young people, and also in making sure that young people with additional support needs are properly, and I stress the word properly, supported within the classroom to fulfil their potential. And that's a crucial part of us being confident that the presumption of mainstreaming is being delivered effectively within our education system, where you need to have an adequate availability of individuals such as classroom assistants to make that possible.
Next question from Paul Cochrane, Renfrew area.
Morning, Deputy First Minister.
Morning.
With the challenges that we are currently facing in closing the gap in recruitment, retention and the restoration of salaries, how optimistic are you at being successful in tackling these gaps and at allowing classroom practitioners to be able to focus on their learners and not their managers' needs?
Well, I'm supremely optimistic about it, to be honest, Paul. Actually, I am very optimistic, Paul, because I think the education system feels to me that it's very, very focused on this challenge. You know, I don't go around schools with seeing practice that rejects the importance of closing the poverty-related attainment gap. I see professionals who feel they've been set a very demanding professional challenge, and I don't underestimate the scale of the challenge, because it is a major challenge. The poverty-related attainment gap has been around Scottish education for all my days. It was around in Forester High School when I was in it in the late 1970s and early 1980s, and it hasn't disappeared. But what the First Minister has set out is an ambition to close that over a 10-year period and to make substantive progress in this parliamentary term, for which I have responsibility. And I'm delighted by the way in which the education system has responded to that challenge. And I see a professional creativity that is emerging within individual classrooms to try to achieve that. I see in certain practices, and of course, I see a range of different practices around the country, but I see in a number of schools an invitation being made to classroom teachers to suggest how best resources could be utilised through PEF or the Scottish Attainment Challenge to try to achieve these objectives. So we have got an invitation for professional empowerment to individual classroom teachers to contribute to this agenda. So all of that, to me, is something about which we should be profoundly optimistic. Now, of course, there are challenges that come in the way. As we're, and I'm struck by this, I won't be able to hear your President's speech, but I've had the opportunity to read it and to read some of it in the newspapers. And I don't agree with all of it. I'll just say that now, but I do agree with some of it. And I do agree with the very significant impact and challenge that poverty presents to the education system. And I do agree that it can't all be solved within the classroom, but we can do our bit. We can make our contribution. And what I want to assure you about is that as we pursue this agenda of trying to close the poverty-related attainment gap within education, I feel well supported by the policy interventions of my ministerial colleagues in other portfolios. Because when I look, we had a session the other week there at Bellahouston Academy in Glasgow, focusing on adverse childhood events. It was attended by the First Minister, by the Health Secretary, the Justice Secretary, the Communities Secretary, the Early Years Minister, all of us and me recognising, we had a whole host of stakeholders there, really focused, recognising that collaboratively and cumulatively we have got to do better to try to overcome the effect of adverse childhood events, because if we don't, they're barriers to learning. And so there has to be, so we've got a clear agenda, and we're supported by other areas of government in doing their bit to try to help us on this agenda. So, but then of course, you will also find that the challenges of poverty will continue to present the more welfare reform is pursued by the United Kingdom government, and more families are put into a position where things can be really tough for them. And so that is, so there's an optimistic side of it, Paul, but there's also a challenge to it. But what I want to assure you about is that there's a really focused drive within government to make sure we do all that we can to enable you to be able to address that issue. And then finally, there's your last year payoff line was about the learner's needs, not manager's needs. And I think this does get us to the nub of many issues within the profession that affect workload. Because I think we have got to, everybody, me, local authorities, directors of education, head teachers, faculty leads, departmental heads, individual teachers, have got to have a good look at what we're asking people to report on, to focus on, and all the rest of it, to make sure we're being faithful to the question of, if it's not relevant to the learner's journey, why are you doing it? And that's, I've written that. That was a teacher said that to me in a classroom, and I wrote it out in a letter to every member of the teaching profession in August 2016, and I've used it on countless platforms, and I stick by it, because that's the test that we should be applying, Paul, to whether or not the things that we're doing, the things that we're asking about, are actually relevant to the learner's journey. And individual teachers must feel a sense of empowerment to actually take part in that process and say, well, actually, I'm not sure that report's really going to be that critical to the learner's journey. And that has to be respected within an empowered profession. I can go to that, exactly. I'm sure there's various people who are witnesses here today,
Colleagues, I'm afraid due to the Deputy First Minister's other commitments that we're not going to have time to take any other questions. But
I could take another one, Kevin.
You sure?
Aye, oh aye.
Aye. Right. Don't know what I'm asking him for.
I might live to regret it, but
Well, you may.
I mean, exactly.
Stuart, you're up.
Right, Stuart, it's all on you.
Very briefly, just making very quick reference to your speech, you actually did touch on workload and you did touch on teacher recruitment and retention, and that's positive to hear. However, my question is, Deputy First Minister, you are aware that teachers regularly give free overtime to their employers, and for probationers in particular, this is an expectation. When we consider this free overtime, employers are failing in their duty of care with regards to health and well-being because of the stress that's related to that overtime that they do for nothing just to keep up with the pace of change. And this also significantly reduces the value of our current and future salaries when we take the free overtime into account. Do you not agree that this could well be a major contributing factor in failing to recruit and to retain sustainable numbers into the teaching profession?
Stuart, I think it's a very important point, Stuart, and I recognise that there isn't a teacher in the country that's working the hours that are stipulated in their contract. Not one. I accept that. And I think and I don't take it for granted. I appreciate it and I value it and I respect it because it's teachers making their contribution to fulfilling their professional motivation. And their profession, and I don't think people come into the teaching profession to work a contract. They come into education to transform the lives of young people, and in many respects that involves going the extra mile and doing beyond the contract, and I respect that, and we need it because it's part of how we make sure there's a comprehensive offering an education for young people. So, but what comes with that is a need also to take the proper care about the well-being of teaching staff. And that's very important because the well-being of teaching staff, teaching staff will not perform well in the classroom if their own well-being is not properly supported. So there is a duty of care on employers to make sure that teachers are well supported. There is a need for us to make sure that that's properly exercised, and I acknowledge the importance of it to you today. I make no attempt to suggest otherwise. And I think what we have to particularly focus on, you raised the issue of probationers, of making sure that we work collaboratively to make sure that as new individuals come into the profession, they get the most supported entrance into the profession to sustain their commitment and their enthusiasm. Because I certainly talk to a lot of probationer teachers around the country who, when they come into schools, feel as if they are getting access to years and years and years of professional capability, which strengthens their practice and helps them become good and effective teachers. Because none of us can take the view that the learning stops when you finish initial teacher education. You can't possibly take that view. Those probationers need to have access to that quality of educational leadership that surrounds them, and that obviously has to be deployed within a properly supported workforce. So I acknowledge the point you make. I think it's important that the well-being of individual teachers is properly and fully supported, and certainly in the agenda that I want to take forward, that enhancement of professional support is a key part of that agenda.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Swinney. Seamus has got a few points he would like to make to address these things.
Thank you, Minister. We're very pleased to receive you at the Congress here, and we're very keen to listen to what you've said so far. You've given us a number of things to think about, and I think it's probably worth raising those with you. The career pathways, that's something that we've been campaigning for a number of years, and we can believe now that that is going in the right direction. We hope it moves very quickly. It needs to take place sooner rather than later. I know that the group is due to report by the end of September. But we do need that to be done fairly quickly to move us forward on that, because we're not going to solve the problems of retention and recruitment of teachers unless we start to address where teachers actually are given a career pathway. And I'm pleased to hear you talk about subject leadership. Again, that's something that we've been very keen for you to move on with, because it's very passionate for secondary school teachers about the subjects that they teach. And what they've seen over the last number of years is it being devalued because it's not been regarded as being important in some of the schools. And what we've lost is a whole series of PT subjects, which led the subjects and were at the cutting edge of the developments. And hopefully that's one of the things that we will see coming back. The Charter Teacher Scheme, yes, we need some sort of replacement for that. It had its failings, but it did give the opportunity for the classroom teacher to move up to reasonable pay levels. So I think we do want to talk to you about that as well. We do agree with the excellence and equity. Yes, that's what we want. We want the best for our young people. That's why we go into teaching. But we've got a number of challenges. And I say we've mentioned pay is one of those, career progression, but also workload. I can't go away and not say workload is killing our teachers at the moment. Even though we've tried to work with you to get some of the changes made, it's not really affecting people in the schools. And what we're often finding is the drive for improvement usually means more work for the teacher, because it's more micromanagement, more checking, more accountability. We haven't got a problem with accountability, but what we do have a problem with is everybody crawling over everything we do and asking us to justify every decision we've made. We need to get back to the point where teacher professional judgment is regarded as important, because the experts are the people out here on the floor. They're the people inside the schools. And unfortunately, the system doesn't seem to appreciate that. They put more blocks and burdens in the way. The CFE, yes, it's a wonderful thing. And in many other jurisdictions, they're going down this, they're following our line. But the problem we do have is the conflict it has in the senior phase. All the good things that are done through the CFE are being challenged and thrown out in some cases, and in the drive to get exam success. Poor youngsters, and I would argue that some of our youngsters who've gone through National 5 this year have had a horrendous time. And later on this afternoon, I'll be giving you some figures on our survey of the stress and the pressure it's been put on the young people, but I'll go into that in a bit more detail. And I will share that with you in due course as well. But that is a very important part for us, that is that workload needs to be seriously tackled. Some of the issues, and I do recall having a discussion about the Chief Inspector's guidance to schools, and we did say to you at the time, that was very good for primary school teachers. It doesn't always apply for secondary. And we need to have something that is specific for secondary teachers, for people to be stood back from some of the things they do. And I wish the phrase that you used there, if it's not in the children's interest, why are we doing it? Those are the same words. And the issue on contact time, if you talk to any of our members, they will tell you they're working up to the maximum. They don't have the time to develop, and that's what we really need to have, is a system to create the time for teachers to do other things, the things to develop their subject, to deal with individual youngsters. That time is not there in schools at the moment. Unfortunately, we've got too many examples where classes have been split because we haven't got enough teachers. We've got situations where classes are grouped together in a hall and they're not being taught, but they've been supervised whilst we try and get a supply to. So we've got to really seriously address the retention and recruitment issues to make sure that we keep those in. We are involved in the pay negotiations, and hopefully that will get us to a much better place to address some of those issues. But workload is a very, very important part. The other point I can't let you get away with, unfortunately, is the Scottish Education Council. You've said that everybody's involved. Unfortunately, the SSTA has not been invited to take part in that. And one of the things that you did say, this is setting the direction for travel for education without the secondary teacher's voice. And I think that's a serious misgiving in that particular organisation. So we wish you well in the next 12 months. And we hope that you are, because we want you to succeed. We really do. There's no sort of personal agenda going on here. We want the system to work, but we want it to work for teachers and for pupils. So everything you can do to listen to secondary school teachers, because we are different, that's why we exist. Please listen to us. And some of the things that we've been saying to you over the last number of years are found to be true. It's not just us talking in the wilderness. We've been telling you some of the problems that are going to come, and I think we need to address those with you. So please engage us and be involved in where we go for secondary school teachers in the future. Bye for now.
A round of applause for the Deputy First Minister, Paul.